I want to use this image of Benedict Cumberbatch to show how important angles and proportions are when drawing people. In other videos, I've shown how angles and proportions are used to draw still life and perspective drawings. This video will show how this skill can be used to draw people as well. I chose this reference from photographer Charles Gallet because it's a good profile photo, which makes it easier to see the angles as they compare to the horizontal and vertical edges of the paper. This method of observing angles and proportions is a primary skill all artists use. The more you practice it, you'll come to realize that you can draw anything you see. This drawing isn't concerned with shading. Also, it's not the exact process I follow when drawing a portrait. I'm more likely to sketch out a loose structure of the head and feature placement, as well as the rough shape of the main shadows. I'll be devoting future videos to these skills, but in this video, I wanted you to see just how much you can accomplish with careful observation of angles and proportions and how vital this skill is. The finished drawing isn't 100% accurate. There are a few places I was off. I think it's because I've been doing caricature for so many years, I have to make an extra effort to slow down and make sure the measurements are correct. I hope these ideas on angles and proportions will increase your confidence in drawing. In other videos, I've talked about measuring the angles to get accurate measurements for your drawings. And since the main thing that we're trying to do is get the subject that we're trying to draw in the same place on the paper, the best way to do that is by using a grid just for the center lines. When you're working here in the middle of your drawing, it's hard to estimate an angle to the edge of the paper when it's when it's so far away. So having that extra center line gives you a place to measure. I'm using US letter, which is 8.5 inches by 11. And the easiest way to, without even using a ruler, the easiest way to find the center, to get those center lines, is to fold a blank sheet of paper in half. And fold it in half again. And that is 1/4 of the image. So all you need to do is line that up to the center or to the edge of the paper and give yourself a tick mark for the center, and do the same thing again down here at the bottom. This will measure, or this will give us the four edges. And on a reference photo, I recommend making the line fairly dark, but on your actual drawing, you might want to make it a little lighter so it's easier to erase. I think the biggest challenge that you're going to have, the biggest challenge that I have at the beginning stages, is finding the halfway point, or 1/3 of some distance. So when we look at this and we say that, from the center point to the edge of the paper, where is the halfway? And we can do a guess, and you can take your pencil and and make an estimate and say, I think that from, I like to use the edge of a flat eraser because it's kind of easy, for some reason it's easier for me to estimate a flat edge than a tiny point of a pencil, but that's just personal, that's for me. But I'll take a guess and I'll say that from about here to here, and I use my thumb to mark that, and I use my other finger, and I go, well, from there to there, I think that's half. So I take a guess, and when I bring my thumb over to that halfway point, I can see I'm off by just a little bit. So without moving anything, I can say, well, I'm short. So let me just move it just a little. And I can see that from there to there, that feels much better. And the point that I'm looking at is, see where his nose meets his upper lip is real close to that halfway. From there to there. Oh, I'm off again. From there to there. And estimating the halfway point of the line is important. Measuring that halfway mark. And this might seem tedious. But the more careful you are at this early measuring, that feels good. The more careful you are at the very first measurements you take, the more accurate your drawing will be as it progresses. Because if you're off just a little bit and start measuring, it will compound that error, and then you'll be well into your drawing and be frustrated that things aren't, there's a distortion that has happened. And this is something I have to mention to you. When your drawing is exactly the same size as your reference, you could very easily just take a measurement and go, well, look at that, his chin is from there to there, and you go over here and you make the mark. But not everything that you draw will be one-to-one. You might be looking out at something in the real world, and it has no bearing on the final size of the drawing. So the habit that you are trying to develop is to make equivalent measurements. Find something in the drawing that is equal to that you can compare it with. So if we look at from the center to where the nose meets the lip, we can see that that is also equal to where the back of his neck joins the hair. So it gives us something to double check our measurement with. So we know that from here to here, and it's above that line some. But I know, so we've got two landmarks in place. So we can start looking at some angles. The angle of the back of his neck, we know that it's not vertical. This vertical line that we have coming in the vertical edge of the paper, it's at some angle, and it doesn't matter numerically what that is, but we're just trying to take a mental snapshot of what that angle is, and then try to keep that same angle as you bring it over to your drawing. And early on, you might find it helpful to, actually I'm on the wrong side of the line. I'm going to go to the inside because I'm right-handed. But you might find it easy to get that angle in place, bring it over, and get that same angle, and hold your pencil down and just use it as a little bit of a guide. And double check. Look at that angle compared to the verticals, and come over here and see if you are, I don't know, that feels a little more extreme. I'm not sure. I think it should be just a little steeper. And I'm not worried about how long it is at this point. I'm just trying to capture some of these angles. Now, let's also try to find the distance from here to there. I've got it, okay. Now, how is that distance compared to that center line down? And I can see that it lines up right at the point where his neck meets his shirt collar. So that same measurement that we've got here, I can turn it, and I know a third landmark. And then I can do an estimate. There is a curve here, but generally, if I can get that general angle, and sometimes when you bring it over, there can be a shift, so you're just trying to be as careful as you can. And that feels accurate. And I'm going to hold it in place and just, now at the beginning I mentioned using a second pencil, but when you get a little more used to this, you'll be able to compare an angle, bring it over, and take a mental snapshot of that. Picture that angle in your mind and just pick up the pencil and quickly sketch it in. You're looking for things, a unit of measure. And right now we've been using this distance as a unit of measure. Half of this line, half of this line, half of this line. It's been very helpful. Is there anything else that lines up with? What about going here from the center line? The ear is actually less than that. And there's nothing really up here above. It's like in the middle of his forehead. So is there a landmark? Here is a landmark. Actually, this point of his hair, that corner of his hair, is that same distance. Okay, so that's good to know. Let's take that same and take a guess at how far away it is from the center. And let's just, we are there, and about that same distance over here, and right about there is where this corner of his hairline is. Let's find a second unit of measure. Something, let's say that from the center line to the bridge of his, to where his, where the brow meets the nose. And let's see if that lines up with anything. Is there anything else from the center line that is close to, that we can do some comparisons? And actually, it's not far from the back of his neck to the coat. That's useful. If we can double check our measure from there, it's just a little bit more, but it's pretty good. So if we take that measure and from this line up, and about how far, we know that's the halfway point, so it's a little bit farther than that. A little bit farther than that, and about this distance up. And just give yourself a little mark. We know that inside of that curve is going to be here, and that same distance is going to be from here down to a little bit past that is going to be where the collar is. Now, with this point in mind, let's take a look at this measurement of the angle of his nose. From that center point, we're trying to get. If we're off, it's going to really distort his nose or make it too shallow. So try to get that as accurately as you can. And even though the curve is here, there's another little slight curve, let's not worry about those just yet. Let's get the broad strokes. So with that angle in mind, try to carry that same angle over and take a mental picture of that and lightly sketch it in. Try to capture this angle. Ignore the nose, but there is a plane of the face where the upper lip, the bottom lip, and the chin all line up. And we know where that point is right here, where the nose meets the upper lip, because we've found it here. So we know that from that point coming down, we're just looking for this broad angle. So let's picture that in our mind, carry it over, and from that point, try to capture that angle. And then let's double check it. And at this point, as long as we're working fairly light, we can make corrections, but that feels as accurate as I can get at this point. And I'm also looking now, what about this, the bottom of his chin? Does it line up with, does it point towards anything? And I'm seeing it point to at the center of his collar. And we know where that is. So if I can line this up in the center of the collar and look at the angle, I'll see where the bottom of his chin is. So from there, center of the collar, matching that angle, I can see. And now let's take a double check this. I'm a little steep, so let's even flatten it out just a little. Now I've got a triangle from where this meets. What does this line up with? And it lines up here with his eyebrow, but let's not worry about that right now. Let's just try to capture that angle and duplicate that angle. Now, with this in place, we can worry about these three angled forms. This one, here's the horizontal, and it's just a little down. And then this angle of his, there's a line, this angle of his nose looks like it is lining up with where the center of his lips meet. So if I can capture that angle, it helps me in placing and this is a mark that we can double check. That center line of his lips actually points towards where the hair meets the back of the neck. Get that angle in mind. Go to the back of his neck. And this is the trickiest thing. Even an experienced artist, you're going to have some days that are better than others. Some days you'll see those angles, you'll be able to get them down very carefully, very accurately. And then you're going to have other days where it's going to be off. And it'll be a little bit more of a struggle. So don't let that worry you. With practice, it'll get better. Some of the other skills, we're also using negative space. We're looking at the shape of this angle. Trying to get it in. Now let's take a look at the angle of the eyebrow. And it looks like it's hitting the center point. So I am just going to go from the center point here and capture that. And we know where the end of the nose is, and that a vertical from there, it's not quite, it doesn't come out as far. It's going to be in just a little. There's a little plane that does go vertical. But then we also have this angle of the forehead. So kind of picture that angle, bring it over, and capture that angle as best you can. Let's start working on this angle of his ear. So carrying that same angle over, picture it in your mind. Somewhere on that line is going to be the bottom of his ear. And what about how far is the top of his ear? And does that compare to anything that we have drawn so far? And actually, from that vertical line to the top of his ear is really close to his lip, to the center line. Measure that same thing, that right about there. And let's double check it. You make your mark, double check, remeasure, and that looks way farther. It looks like I was quite a bit off. So let me get back down here to where that mark was. Come up here from the line to here, and I can see I was a bit high. From there to there, that's feeling better. So I know where the bottom and the top of the ear are. I know where this corner. So how far away we do have, let's try to use this as a unit of measure, where the chin meets the neck, and see how that lines up with what we have. And that's not too, that same distance is about where the ear is, the top of the ear. So that same distance we have from the neck to where it joins the shirt is from the center to right there, and that is this point of the ear. And so we know how high the ear is, and we know this curve. Clean that up a little. We know this mark. We know how high the ear is. And let's look at the top to this part. The ear, it's not sitting on his head like straight vertical, but it's at this angle. So let's try to capture that angle of the ear. And now let's compare, let's try to get the width of the ear and compare it to this distance, and from there to there, that's about the same. So from here to that far out, that is, and then I've got, there's these three planes. There's like a straight edge here, there's a straight line here, and then that one. So let's just get this extra angle. We know that this is coming down kind of straight, but somewhere here is this extra angle. Let's look at that. Try to capture it and bring it over and do the same, capture that same angle. And that's not too shabby. Let's erase some of that and erase some of this. So knowing where the ear is placed, we can also look at the hair as it comes. It follows the curve of the ear and just kind of is at this angle. And it meets about close to the center line here. And we can look at that angle. We get that. And let's look at from this corner of his hair, does it line up with anything? I can see it lining up with the back of his neck where the hair and the neck join. So if I follow that same line, then I can see this final little angle. A little bit of the hairline. This part of the hair it's not vertical. It kind of cuts in a little bit. So let's just bring that in a little bit. And we've got another line right here. This angle, it's lining up with the top of his ear. So if I can picture this angle from the top of his ear, from here, and get that angle. And what about vertically? Does it line up with anything useful? Kind of the bottom of his corner of his chin to that vertically is a good location. So from there to there, that's about where we have it. And then from here, it's going to come at this angle. If I can picture that angle, I can arrive at this point we were looking for. And let's start looking at some of the placement of features in here. We have a really easy landmark from the edge of the nostril to this line that comes down to the corner of his mouth. There's actually two lines. This curves a little, and then I've got a second one. And it looks like this line lines up with his. I can see 3 points. I can see the point where the eyebrow meets the nose, is in line with that, and is in line with where the shirt meets. All three of those make a really helpful guide. So I know that from here to the shirt, if I've got those from there to where the shirt meets, that is where let's remeasure. This is a really critical measure. We want to be really careful. And it looks like I've got it too far to the back, so let's bring it forward just a little. From there to there. That's That's working pretty good. So I've got this, I've got a little negative shape, a double line that I can use right here. I can see where it curls just that little bit. This photograph, I can't really see, there's not a strong value change of the upper lip. So I'm not going to really focus on it, but what I can, I'm looking for this V shape that cuts in right here. And this angle, let's double check that angle, where it goes from the nose all the way down. And I've got two angles, a strong angle of the lower lip and the curve of the chin. There isn't really a strong angle. So I'm just going to focus on trying to capture that angle. Just do some estimating there. And now I've got this curve of the nostril. This part here points to where these two angles converge. So I know that from here, and I can see that, and it's really close to that center line. The highest part where it changes direction is right above that point. And then the bottommost curve here is touching that line. And I can just kind of look at the negative space around this. And now we can start looking for placement of the eye. So without trying to think of the eye, because if you start thinking, okay, now I'm going to put the eye in, your tendency is going to be to make that eye very large in comparison to how it really is. So let's start, don't think of the eye, but instead think of, look for extremities. And we can see that there's a vertical line from the corner of his mouth to this outermost fold of the eye. So from the corner of his mouth up in a straight line, somewhere here is going to be that furthermost point of the of that fold. What about I'm looking for this angle. Like I've got a fairly clear angle right here. and I'm trying to see what it lines up with. And it looks like if I follow this line out here, it's hitting the furthermost plane change here, between here and here. So if I can envision the angle from here to his eye and line that up the same, and lightly sketch that in. I know that somewhere along here will be this top edge. Now what about this extremity? Is it lining up with anything? And I can see that from the edge of his nostril straight up is about where the edge of the surface of his eyeball is. So from here, straight up, that's going to be the surface of his eye. And I can look at this angle, the bottom angle, and immediately it's looking like I can line it up to the top of his ear. And that's helpful. From the top of his ear, now, it doesn't join there. Here, when you get into the final details, you're focusing on the negative shapes around. And of course, it's not straight. The eyeball is not straight. And the actual, from the edge of the eye to the edge of the iris to the corner is 3 equal spaces. So if I can divide this into 1, 2, 1, 1, 2. It's not 3 equal spaces, sorry, it's in half. In half, where it's 1, 2. Now I can also look at, there's a negative space right here, this interesting shape that is lining up from the, it's doing this, straight up from this point is about the extreme part. It comes like straight in. It goes up at an angle, a little, and this comes up at an angle. And then it's the general area of the eyebrow. We can start looking at this shape of the nose, and it actually this is feeling too prominent. So you can refine the edges. And I can see the angle that from about the corner of his eye to that hair, his hair is making a stroke that follows that from the corner of his eye up. I've got that. And what about at this innermost part? That's where the part of his hair is. So what is the angle of that? Take an estimate and get the general angle of that part. And let's see, how far is it from the hair? The hair to the center line is from the center line to the back of the hair. So let's from the center line to the hair, center line to the back of the hair. And I can see there's this angle. I see one angle and a second angle. So let's just focus on this one right now and try to capture that. I see an angle that's going this way. And I can see this angle here. And then it cuts in. And from up here, there is an angle. Some of it here goes above and some comes below, but generally it looks like it's at about this angle. So let's try to capture that same angle. We can take this above, right about in this area is where it starts to come down. I can see kind of a V here, and a couple parts of the hair are coming up. And there's a ridge that at about the halfway point. We're pretty close to capturing the main landmarks, placement of the key features. Here we can see this curve, and we did see this where it comes in, it comes down. You can be a little more forgiving with clothing. The back we really can't see. Let's get back to this. About this distance above, we have some of the hair. And at this point, I have enough of the landmarks in place. I can start just eyeballing. Now, see how this kind of disappears? I know where it is, but if I can't see it, I'm not going to draw it. but I can see this edge. I can see a line, and actually this line in the ear is a prominent landmark that lines up with the hair right there. So from the hair straight down, I've got this landmark of the ear. And at this point you can start darkening the shadows, but to my eye this looks like I've captured the main elements. Let me refine some of these with the eye. I've got the main landmarks, but if I pursue this to a completed drawing, you know, it's built on a strong foundation, and that's what we're looking for.
So it didn't turn out quite like I was expecting. When I was measuring things from the vertical and the horizontal, everything was fine. But when I finished, you could put the drawing on top of the resource, everything was pretty accurate, except for this one edge, the bridge of his nose, you know, the forehead, the bridge of the nose. And I was shocked. Well, how could this happen? I was measuring everything so carefully, and why would this one part be off? And I realized that it's because of the dark background. Remember that very first measure of where that halfway point was between the center vertical and the edge of the paper. When I found that halfway point, it was to the edge of the paper. But that background is so dark that as I'm near out here in the middle, and I'm working on the nose, those things that are the closest to the edge, that dark background was so strong. It was like a magnet. It was affecting the placement of those edges and those lines. And when I compare it, I noticed that it's off by about the exact same distance as that little white edge of the paper. So, you know, one thing to keep in mind with your resource pictures is make sure that you either adjust the photo so that that background does not compete with your visual perception of the actual edge of the paper, or no background at all. Anyway, keep that in mind.
If you want a more in-depth look at these drawing skills and more exercises, I highly recommend the book Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by Betty Edwards. These ideas aren't exclusive to this book. They've been around for many years, but this book provides exercises that can have a huge impact on your learning to draw. Just to be upfront, this book and author aren't a sponsor. I just wanted to share it with you. Like and subscribe, and I'll let you know when I post new videos on drawing. Thanks for watching.